Welcome back, everyone. It's time for the next video of the Samurai 7 retrospective, and this one will be on arguably the most important of the 7 samurai, Kanbe. Now usually I save the most important characters for the last video in these series. However, as this is the 50th video on the channel, and as Samurai 7 is an ensemble piece with no true main character, I've decided to place Kanbe here, as he's probably the most three-dimensional character in the entire series. Now Kanbe is introduced in episode 1, as a loner who, while extremely skilled in the ways of the samurai, and obviously attached to them, comes off as aloof and perhaps a bit sad. He initially refuses to take part in the Kanbe village operation, stating that he's tired of fighting losing battles and that he himself is a loser. He doesn't seem to care that much about the village initially, and only joins after Kiara kind of forces him to rescue her by jumping from a great height. After this encounter, Kanbe appreciates the boldness of the group and joins in. As the only members of the group by this point are Katsushiro, who immediately requests to become Kanbe's student, and Kikuchio, who is frankly unqualified by this point, Kanbe immediately falls into the role as the leader of the group. He even allows Kikuchio to stay and begrudgingly takes on Katsushiro as a student, a process which we will examine a bit more in a bit. He makes plans to get a total of 7 samurai and fortify the village. As the group recruits more samurai, gets into fights, and eventually escapes the city, he is always with them at the helm to see that the mission is accomplished. He even accepts a new mission along the way, pledging to rescue the captive women once the defense of the Kanbe village is complete. Once everyone is gathered at the village, Kanbe retains his position as leader and successfully sees the village defended. Seeing the death of Kurobe, however, Kanbe seems dismayed by another loss and wanders off on his own to rescue the captive women. This sees him confess to a crime he didn't commit so that he can get an audience with the emperor and stab him. Attempt to stab him. He doesn't succeed and is caught, only to be set to be executed. He is spared, however, due to Ukyo's machinations, and then rejoins and reforms the group after Katsushiro leaves in anger to take the capital. This mission is set up to be a sort of final hurrah, a death ride of sorts that will be, no matter what the outcome, his final battle. The mission, of course, is successful, and Kanbe survives, but again laments the loss of friends, and thus another losing battle. This leads us to analyzing Kanbe's character, and this one is quite layered, with many different aspects, all somewhat centered on the internal conflict of his between the ideals of being a warrior and the realities of such. He is the embodiment of the issues that arise when an idealistic individual meets the grim realities of the world we live in. We can see this both with his seemingly detached attitude, and yet the very developed moral compass he never seems to stray from. He is a character who is defined by the conflict of his brain and his heart. He is a man who wants to do the best, but knows that realistically it won't always help everyone, and or still come at a great cost. His heart tells him to exercise justice and righteous actions for the greater good, while his brain tells him that doing so realistically won't benefit him or fundamentally change the world. His heart tells him to use his great skills for good, while his brain tells him that no matter how skilled one man is, one man can only do so much. His heart tells him to empathize and take care of those around him, while his brain tells him empathy won't save the dead, and that strong attachment could even impair his judgment and hold him back. His heart tells him to feel no matter what is rational, and his brain tells him to think regardless of how he feels. And this sets the stage for a flawed man, and his character development. Kanbe is smart enough to know that unfettered idealism will inevitably only lead to disappointment and folly. However, he's smart enough to know that a moral compass is still needed to live a good life, even if there isn't too much feeling behind it anymore. To balance these two factors and maintain his identity, Kanbe has in a way made his moral compass into a sort of objective list by which he strives to live by and stay on course. His moral compass has petrified into a sturdy rock, which survives and guides him, even after the idealism and happiness that birthed it seemingly died long ago. This lets him balance between his brain and his heart to create a sort of passable zen mid-ground. As such, he is never a bleeding heart held back by emotions, but he isn't a heartless psychopath either, even if he does come off as cold from time to time. Now I say passable because Kanbe is not a happy man. Arguably, he may never achieve happiness by this point in life. No, instead he is a man who wants to feel, but has felt so much by this point in time that he realistically can't be bothered to consistently or strongly feel a majority of the time. He is, in a word, jaded. And while a good man, is also a man who has subconsciously learned to just let go of negativity instead of letting it fester. While this sounds good on paper, it's only possible because he's grown so numb to the world and his own emotions. He's aware that many things that will happen are out of his control, and that at this point it's not worth getting worked up over. He realizes that, and unfortunately also, that he will probably be like this for the rest of his life. He knows this though, and while showing some emotions from time to time, even having emotional outbursts, he for the most part just maintains a sort of mid-ground, which, though seemingly unsatisfying, is probably the best of some bad options, If he became completely emotional, he would probably have given in to despair or violent impulses by this point. If he had been completely rational, he would probably become an objectively bad person, as this would lead him to discard his moral compass and live by no true morals at all. However, he does have this middle option, and for this reason, in spite of his inner conflict, he always seems in control of himself. While he never seems too happy or sad or emotionally involved, he never gives in to despair or seems mad outside of select, usually justified moments, which seem to specifically trigger him. In fact, his emotions usually fall between mild amusement, mild irritation, and mild disappointment. Again, while some may argue this leads to the whole Kanbe is a psychopath argument, it really just conveys that he is a man with a good deal of emotional strength, emotional control, and that he's also extremely jaded. This is a man who's basically staked everything for his lifestyle and ideals, and it's clear that he's had to pay many tolls to do so. His many experiences have jaded him to the world, however it's also given him knowledge of the world, and illustrated to him the need to remain calm and in control of himself. It's not that he can't emote at all, and that it's not that he refrains from emoting because he's so in control of himself and knows he needs to remain calm. No, instead it's a combination of these two. An inner calm insulated by years of apathy brought upon by loss and emotional experiences. I mean, just think of it for a bit. Kanbe's ideals point to a man who at some point was probably idealistic and excited. We see that even though he's jaded to this day, his moral compass is still present, and this points to a man who believes in the codes of honors that idealized warriors are supposed to stick to. He believes in the righteousness of combat from time to time, or at least he used to. It seems he doesn't anymore. However, this is a man who, while naive at that point, ended up going to war nonetheless, where he experienced great losses in both friends, property, and personal self, and he found no real honor in death or killing. He found that his ideals did not insulate him from the grim ways of the world. However, they did prevent him from sinking too deep into the grim ways of the world. As such, he returned from war, a very jaded and different man, and, having been on the losing side, he finds himself returning to a totally different society, eager to leave relics like him in the past, regardless of his own accomplishments or conduct. With no real purpose now, all he has left are the set of ideals and lifestyle which got him here in the first place. He is left alone to stew in an apathetic world, with no real support or goal. Anyone would probably be at least a little dejected in this case, if they put all they had into a set of ideals or tasks or lifestyle, only to be written off in the end for things outside of their control. And this explains why Kanbe is sort of a tragic samurai character, a character who, while exercising the ideals of a romanticized past, lives in a brutal and grim future. A man who, while noble in his own cause, is surrounded by unnoble people in an unnoble world, and is left to navigate these things on his own in a way which he can never do completely satisfactorily. This is a man who is a relic of the past, barely eking out a present. This tragic nature of sorts also, though, benefits him in an odd way, in that it allows him to see the ways of the world, and his jadedness allows him to be completely open about it. He realizes that sometimes living requires us to pull back from our emotions and analyze situations rationally. We see this as one of the most important lessons he teaches a young Katsushiro. Now, Katsushiro's relationship with Kanbe is one of the most developed in the series, and arguably the most important. In it, Kanbe serves as a mentor and pseudo-father figure to Katsushiro, who in turn serves as an enthusiastic student and later a sort of rebellious son. This dynamic serves to greatly develop both characters, and in return allows insight into Kanbe's heart and mind. It opens up a discussion to ask if Kanbe is actually a good mentor or not, and asks us to leave why he takes the approaches he does. To do this, let's first establish some important events in this mentorship. Highlighted in my mind's eye are Kanbe's initial refusal and then acceptance to teach Katsushiro, Kanbe's talk with Katsushiro after Katsushiro's first kill, Kanbe refusing to take Katsushiro with him to rescue the captive women, Katsushiro's break with Kanbe afterwards, and the two's reconciliation accumulating with Katsushiro's graduation. While we won't dissect any of these scenes, as each could honestly have their own video, they're very well composed, I just want to put these down to kind of jot your memory to see where we're coming from, as I will proceed to reference them from this point. First of all, let's talk about how Kanbe straight up refuses Katsushiro's request for a mentorship. This sort of establishes Kanbe as a man who doesn't want to take students. Now, while this may seem to make him rude, or isolated, or selfish, he really only does this because he doesn't want Katsushiro to experience the kind of things that he does. He's telling him, don't sign up for this. It's not as good as you think it might be. And this does show that Kanbe is capable of empathy, and in fact does empathize with his student a great deal. In fact, his tenure as Katsushiro's trainer proved that he is very empathetic towards him and probably sees himself in him. While many of his statements or actions may seem cold or harsh in a vacuum, when taken into context and factored in together, they show that Kanbe is a man who is genuinely trying to help a youth in his own way. He just doesn't quite necessarily know the right way each time, as he's extremely jaded and allows the grim realities of the world to bog down Katsushiro's training from time to time. In a way, he allows this on purpose, as he doesn't necessarily want Katsushiro to be a samurai. He knows that the world isn't fair, and that even the greatest man can still be downtrodden. He knows the pain of loss and isolation, and as someone who has staked everything on being a samurai, he knows that being a samurai can take everything from one. He knows that Katsushiro isn't quite aware of what he signed up for, and he knows that Katsushiro is too naive and unskilled to succeed on his own. He knows all of these facts and pains, and in fact kinda wants to deter Katsushiro because he doesn't want Katsushiro to make the same mistakes he has. Although once Katsushiro resolves to do this, Kanbe decides that if he's gonna do it, he might as well do it right, and thus resolves to take Katsushiro as a student to help him navigate the world as successfully as he can. Again, he only decides to do this after Katsushiro seems resolute. He wants to make sure Katsushiro is resolute because he doesn't want Katsushiro to end up like him, a jaded loner with no real goal in mind, for no reason. He sees himself in Katsushiro, and we can see this in many of the more tender scenes, for example when Kanbe sharpens Katsushiro's blade. While this did come after he struck him, it is a poignant scene which lets us know that Kanbe was trying to teach Katsushiro a lesson, even if in not necessarily the best way. He never strikes Katsushiro out of pure rage or disappointment, but seems to do so out of a triggered rage to sort of blunt both of them out of an emotional stupor. Now while this is obvious with Katsushiro, for Kanbe it's less obvious, although I think it can be said that Katsushiro's distresses distress Kanbe, as Kanbe can empathize with a young man who is going through some great pains, as Kanbe probably did when he was going through his training. Also note that the scene is a softer moment. This shows that Kanbe kind of realizes, or at least sort of realizes, that Katsushiro needs emotional support in addition to basic training and toughening up in order to be a samurai that he wants to succeed. I would like to note that while Kanbe does have moments of anger directed at Katsushiro, they usually are sometime around a softer scene, when Kanbe never apologizes to him, but at least says some kind of lesson. Again, take the blade sharpening scene, where after getting into their little spout, Kanbe shows that he does care for Katsushiro by sharpening his blade and returning it to him. He never holds on to his anger with his student, and can even be seen as extremely forgiving and understanding at certain moments. When Katsushiro kills Kyuzo in friendly fire, for example, Kanbe plainly accepts the reality of the ground and pushes the group along. Katsushiro is extremely distraught, as he should be, but Kanbe doesn't really let the fact hold him back. Instead, he looks at it objectively and sees friendly fire as the tragedy it is, but doesn't judge him or Katsushiro any more harshly than necessary. He simply says that Katsushiro acted with the best intentions in his mind, and therefore he can't necessarily hold it against him. Kanbe does in fact care for Katsushiro, and does throughout the series show some kind of empathy for a young man whom he hopes doesn't end up like him. None of this is to say that Kanbe is a perfect man or teacher or father figure, but instead that he is for the most part trying, or at least trying to prevent Katsushiro from becoming the man Kanbe is today. And this is what I meant when I said Kanbe maintains a steady approach regardless of tone. That approach is that Katsushiro is naive and barely trained, and that if I don't do something about it, he's either going to die a painful death or end up like me, living a painful life. The idea of someone ending up like Kanbe seems to greatly sadden him, and this explains why Katsushiro's distress or issues trigger Kanbe specifically, as it makes a usually calm man outburst in either anger or frustration. He's probably not necessarily angry or frustrated at Katsushiro, but the fact that Katsushiro had to go through such pain, and that Kanbe himself went through such pain. It's kind of picking at an old wound, the old wounds that he's grown numb to. It explains the fluctuations in tone and intensity, as Kanbe seems bothered by the idea that a youth he was once like can mature into the adult he currently is. One can pass their own judgment on whether or not they think Kanbe is a good mentor. That's up to you. But I think the assessment here is that he's a flawed man, and that his flaws as a man seep into his performance as a teacher, for better and worse. They lead him to try and toughen up Katsushiro in some ways that may or may not be the best, as he simply doesn't want Katsushiro to live as tragic a life as him. This is ironic, as Kanbe's desire to prevent Katsushiro from becoming jaded can show him at his most jaded. He doesn't want to feel the pain of losing control and the despair of years of loss. Kanbe knows that there's no honor in death, and seems to believe that the only true victory is a battle avoided. He believes in the precious nature of life, and is always eager to forgive, despite how jaded he is. All of this eagerness shows that Kanbe is a man who at least is trying to keep moving forward. While his character is tragic, I appreciate how the show handles this. The story never really dwells on how much pain he's in or how messed up his life is, but instead on what he's doing about it now and how he continues to develop. I like the approach of the show because of how open it is. While Kanbe is not an open character and has a great deal of nuance to him, he's honest to himself and the viewer. He walks in jaded, he shows that he's very jaded, and yet he still tries to help anyways because he knows it's the right thing to do. He is a flawed man and a strong man, and in a way these two kind of buttress each other to make a very memorable and enduring character. This is a character who shows the true breadth of the human experience, as someone who can do both very noble acts and is very skilled, and yet is also flawed in his own ways, and not necessarily in touch with his own emotions. It is a man who, while accomplishing great deeds, is still somewhat tragic, but a tragic character who can still accomplish great deeds. It is a man who can go off on his own and to do his own thing, but can also interact greatly in groups and bring people together, even if he himself has lost the connectivity that many of us may now have. He's a man who, while numb, has kind of forced himself to feel in some cases, and has allowed himself to always follow the path of righteousness, even when he himself doesn't necessarily benefit from it. He is the pinnacle of the melancholic and lonely samurai, going off into a futile mission to make sure that he does what is best. In fact, the kind of death ride summarizes it, as Kanbe has kind of like come to an acceptance of sorts as he just gives in to the idea of a final mission with no plan, going in guns a-blazing. He comes to a sort of peace with himself that even if he is a loser, he is a righteous loser. We can see this in the final scene at Katsushiro's graduation, when Kanbe finally is at terms with himself and what he's done, giving up the way of the blade to pass on to a new generation who, for some reason, wants it, in this case Katsushiro. While Kanbe does lament the loss of his friends and another losing battle, he has seemed to come to terms with at least himself to some bit, and has seemed to have found himself to an extent as well. He is a man who, aware of the fact that he will never completely fix himself, has learned to be satisfied, or at least content with what he has now. He is a man who has upheld the noble warrior ideals he seeks to live by, even if he has become bogged down in the grim realities of the world.